The lecture hall buzzed with quiet sounds from dozens of different species. Tall Corvani students with thick, bark-like skin sat next to tiny Etherian classmates, whose crystal bodies chimed softly when they moved. Quick Zephyrite students with their large compound eyes darted between seats, while other alien species filled the remaining spaces. Professor Veltar, a massive Corvani whose voice rumbled like distant thunder, pointed at the floating hologram above his desk. The image showed strange cells and organisms from dangerous worlds across the galaxy. These creatures, the professor said in his deep voice, come from what we call Deathworlds. These are planets so dangerous that only the strongest life forms can survive there. Kim Hwan sat quietly in the third row, taking notes in his neat handwriting. He was the only human in the class, maybe the only human in the entire academy. His black hair fell slightly over his eyes as he wrote, and he wore the same simple gray uniform as all the other students. Around him, his alien classmates whispered each other in their various languages. Some made musical sounds, others clicked or buzzed, and a few rumbled like small earthquakes. Juan had grown used to these sounds over the past year at Zenith Academy. The Academy was famous throughout the galaxy. It brought together the smartest young minds from hundreds of different worlds. Students came here to learn about other species, other cultures, and other ways of thinking. Most graduates became diplomats, scientists, or explorers who helped keep peace between the many worlds of the Galactic Alliance. Juan liked his classes, especially this one about xenobiology. He found it interesting to learn how different life forms adapted to survive on their home worlds. Some grew thick armor, others developed poison, and some became incredibly fast or strong. Now, Professor Veltar continued, who can tell me what makes a world dangerous enough to be classified as a death world? Several hands shot up around the room. An Etherian student's crystal arm sparkled as she raised it. High gravity? She asked, her voice like wind chimes. Good. The professor nodded. What else? Extreme temperatures. Buzz, a Zephyrite student. Toxic atmosphere. Rumbled a young Corvani. Dangerous predators. Added another student. Professor Veltar smiled, showing his flat, plant-eating teeth. Excellent answers. All of these factors can make a world hostile to life. The more of these dangers a world has, the higher we rank it on the death world scale. Juan continued taking notes, but he also watched his classmates. He had learned that different species showed emotions in different ways. The Etherians grew brighter when they were happy and dimmer when they were sad. The Corvani's bark-like skin changed color, slightly based on their mood. The Zephyrite moved their wings faster when they were excited. Right now, all of them seemed engaged and interested in the lesson. This was normal. Violence and danger were abstract concepts to most of them. Their home worlds were safe, peaceful places where the biggest worry might be a thunderstorm or a small earthquake. The hologram changed to show a new planet. This one looked dark and frightening, with jagged mountains and swirling storms. This is Keth Prime, Professor Veltar explained. It's classified as a Class 9 Death World. The gravity is 3 times what most of you are used to. The air is poisonous to most species. Deadly predators hunt in packs across its surface. Some of the students made worried sounds. A few Etherians dimmed noticeably at the scary description. The creatures that evolved on Keth Prime, the professor continued, had to become incredibly dangerous just to survive. They developed natural weapons, armor, and hunting instincts that make them some of the most feared beings in the galaxy. Juan looked up from his notes. He knew about Keth Prime. He also knew about several other dangerous worlds. During his time in Earth's military, he had studied threat assessments for dozens of species and planets. The lights suddenly went out. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the building. The gentle hum of the Academy's power systems died, leaving in strange silence between the alarm sounds. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside their classroom. These weren't the soft steps of students or the careful walk of teachers. These footsteps belonged to someone who wanted others to hear them coming. The classroom door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. The reinforced metal door, designed to withstand accidents and emergencies, crumpled like paper and flew across the room. Several Etherian students scattered behind desks, their crystal bodies chiming in terror, like broken bells. The Corvani students froze completely, their bark skin turning pale with fear. The Zephyrite's wings buzzed frantically as they looked for escape routes that didn't exist. 3 figures entered the classroom. They moved with the smooth, deadly grace of natural predators. Their leader was massive, wearing armor so black it seemed to absorb the emergency lighting. His face was hidden behind a featureless mask, but his presence filled the room with menace. This was the Shade. Even students who had lived sheltered lives on peaceful worlds knew that name. He was the most feared assassin in the galaxy. Governments paid him enormous sums just to stay away from their planets. Nobody moves. The Shade's voice was like grinding metal. We're not here to hurt students. We just need your professor to send a message for us. Terror filled the classroom. Students who had never experienced real violence suddenly found themselves face to face with legendary danger. But in the third row, Kim Hwan simply leaned back in his chair. A small smile appeared on his face as he studied the intruders with calm, interested eyes. The Shade noticed the human's strange reaction and tilted his head, confused by the complete lack of fear. The Shade moved through the classroom like a nightmare come to life. His heavy boots crushed fallen pieces of the broken door as he walked between the rows of terrified students. Every step was calculated to create maximum fear. He stopped next to a young Zephyrite student who was buzzing with panic, his compound eyes darting everywhere looking for escape. The Shade reached down with one armored hand and casually backhanded the insect-like student. The Zephyrite flew across 3 desks before crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. That was gentle, the Shade announced to the room. I wanted you all to understand that resistance is pointless. An Etherian student near the front of the class tried to crawl away, her crystal body dim with terror. The Shade noticed her movement and grabbed her delicate arm. He squeezed slowly, and the crystal limb began to crack with sounds like breaking glass. The Etherian's musical voice rose to a painful shriek. Stop! Professor Veltar boomed from behind his desk. Leave the students alone. The Shade released the injured Etherian and turned toward the professor. Ah! There's a voice I wanted to hear. You're going to help me send a message to the Galactic Council. They have something that belongs to my employer. While the Shade spoke to the professor, his 2 companions secured the classroom. One moved to block the main door, while the other covered the emergency exit. Both carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The Shade continued his intimidation display, moving from student to student. He grabbed a young Corvani by the throat, lifting the tree like being off the ground despite the student's considerable size and weight. The Corvani's bark skin turned almost white with fear. You see, the Shade said to the cowering students while still holding Corvani in the air, I evolved on a world that most of you couldn't survive for 5 minutes. Ket Prime made me what I am today. He dropped the gasping Corvani student and spread his arms wide. 3 times normal gravity built these muscles. Poisonous air that would kill you in one breath made my lungs stronger. Predators that hunt in packs taught me to be faster, smarter, and more ruthless than anything else in my world. The Shade's voice grew deeper, more threatening. I am what happens when evolution creates the perfect killer. I have ended the lives of politicians, generals, crime lords, and anyone else who thought they were untouchable. Entire star systems pay tribute just to keep me away from their worlds. He walked slowly through the classroom, feeding on the terror of the students. Each species showed fear differently, but all of them were clearly terrified. The Etherians had dim to barely visible light. The Corvani sat frozen like ancient trees in a storm. The Zephyrites had stopped buzzing and gone completely still. Fear is a survival instinct. The Shade continued his lecture. It keeps weak creatures alive by making them avoid danger. Right now, your fear is telling you the truth. I am the most dangerous thing you will ever encounter. The Shade had worked his way through most of the classroom, enjoying the display of terror from each group of students. Then he reached the 3rd row and stopped in front of the human. Kim Hwan had not moved during the entire display. He sat relaxed in his chair, with one arm draped casually over the back. His posture was comfortable, almost lazy. More importantly, his face showed no fear at all. Instead, he watched the Shade with the same calm interest he had shown during Professor Veltar's lecture. The Shade stared at the human through his mask. In decades of killing and terrorizing, he had never seen such complete lack of appropriate fear. Even the most hardened criminals showed some reaction to his presence. This human looked almost bored. "You!" the Shade growled, pointing one armored finger at Juan. "You seem to think you're special." Juan's small smile grew a little wider. He tilted his head slightly, like someone considering an interesting puzzle. "Not special," he said in a calm, conversational tone. "Just educated." The human gestured casually toward the holographic display that was still flickering above the professor's desk. The image showed the dark, dangerous surface of Keth Prime. "See, Professor Veltar was just teaching us about Deathworld adaptations before you interrupted." Juan continued. His voice was polite, almost friendly. "Keth Prime, right? Class 9 Deathworld? Impressive." He paused, and his smile took on a different quality. It was no longer the polite smile of a student. It became something else entirely. Something that made the Shade's confidence waver for the first time in years. "The thing is," Juan said, his voice still calm and educational, "Earth is classified as a class 12 Deathworld." The Shade's entire body went rigid. Around the classroom, the alien students who knew anything about the Deathworld classification system made small sounds of shock and disbelief. "The difference," Juan explained, his tone now carrying an edge that made even the terrified students pay attention, "is that class 9 worlds create perfect predators like you, but class 12 worlds create something much more dangerous." The Shade's hand moved toward his weapon, but he hesitated. Something about the human's complete confidence was deeply unsettling. "They create the things that hunt perfect predators," Juan finished. His smile was now genuinely predatory. For the first time in decades, the Shade felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. Lee Sue pressed herself against the wall behind an overturned desk, her heart pounding as she watched her human classmate. She had known Kim Juan for almost 2 years now. He was always quiet, always helpful with homework, always polite. He had helped her understand difficult concepts in their physics class and shared his lunch when she forgot hers. This was not the same person. The Shade stood frozen in front of Juan, his entire body tense. The legendary assassin who had terrorized the galaxy for decades was staring at a human student who looked completely relaxed. Around the room, the other students watched in confused silence. "You want to know about Death Worlds?" Juan asked, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the quiet classroom. "Let me tell you about Earth." He stood up slowly from his chair. His movements were smooth and controlled, like water flowing downhill. Nothing about the motion seemed threatening, but somehow it made the Shade take a small step backward. "We didn't evolve claws," Juan said, holding up his ordinary human hands. "No natural armor." He tapped his chest, which looked soft compared to the Shade's intimidating bulk. "No poison glands, no enhanced strength, no thick skin." Park Min, a Zephyrite student hiding under a desk, watched Juan's hands as he spoke. The human was holding a simple writing stylus, rolling it between his fingers. To most observers, it looked like a nervous habit, but Min had compound eyes that saw details others missed. Juan was testing the stylus's weight and balance, the same way a warrior might test a blade. "So, what did we evolve instead?" Juan continued, beginning to pace slowly in the small space in front of his desk. "We evolved something much worse. We learned to think while we hunt." The Shade's breathing had changed. The confident, intimidating presence he had projected moments before was starting to crack. "On most death worlds," Juan explained, "predators evolve to be faster, stronger, or more poisonous than their prey. It's an arms race. Bigger teeth, thicker armor, sharper claws. But Earth did something different." He pointed to the hologram still showing cellular structures from various dangerous worlds. "Earth made us persistence hunters. Do you know what that means?" Cho Yuki, an Etherian student whose crystal arm was still cracked from the Shade's earlier violence, found herself listening despite her pain. She had never heard Juan speak this way before. His usual gentle manner was gone, replaced by something that reminded her of the educational videos she had seen about apex predators. "It means we can track our prey for days, weeks, months if necessary," Juan continued. We can survive injuries that would kill most species. We can adapt to any environment, eat almost anything, and we never, ever give up. The Shade's two companions were shifting nervously by the doors. They had been hired to help with a simple intimidation job. This was supposed to be easy. Students were weak, cowardly creatures who would cower and obey. The human was supposed to be the weakest of all. But here's the really interesting part, Juan said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a fascinating concept. We got really, really good at working together to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us. He gestured around the destroyed classroom. See, when you're not the biggest predator on your world, you learn to use tools. You learn to set traps. You learn to turn your environment into a weapon. Song Ray, a young Corvani student whose bark skin was still pale with fear, noticed that Juan had moved closer to Professor's desk. The movement looked casual, like he was just walking while he talked. But now he was in reach of several pieces of equipment. We've been hunting and killing dangerous things for 3 million years, Juan continued. Creatures with claws like swords, teeth like daggers, poison that could drop an elephant. We killed them all with rocks and sticks and teamwork. The Shade finally found his voice. You're just one human, he growled. I am the Shade. I have killed hundreds of beings stronger than you. Juan nodded politely. I'm sure you have. But here's what you don't understand about humans from class. 12 death worlds. He picked up a heavy textbook from Professor's desk, testing its weight like he had tested the stylus. Around the room, his alien classmates began to realize that their quiet, helpful study partner was cataloging every object in the room as a potential weapon. We don't need to be stronger than you, Juan said, his smile returning. We don't need to be faster. We don't even need to be tougher. The Shade raised his weapon, but his hand was shaking slightly. The human's complete confidence was more unsettling than any threat could have been. We just need to be smarter, Juan finished. And unfortunately for you, evolution spent 3 million years making sure we're really good at that. Jung Ho, a massive Corvani student who weighed more than 3 humans combined, watched in amazement as the Shade, the most feared killer in the galaxy, hesitated to attack a single unarmed student. The Shade's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger. Enough talk, Deathworlder. Juan's predatory smile widened, and for the first time his alien classmates understood why the galaxy's military forces spoke about humans in hushed, respectful tones. I was hoping you'd say that, Juan replied. Then everything happened very fast. The Shade's weapon fired with a brilliant flash of energy that scorched the air where Juan had been standing. But the human was no longer there. He had moved the instant before the Shade pulled the trigger, rolling behind a heavy desk with fluid grace. Energy blasts followed him, destroying chairs and melting holes in the walls. The Shade moved with the deadly speed of a creature born to kill, but somehow the human stayed one step ahead of each shot. What happened next was not the brutal fight the Shade had expected. Instead, it became something much stranger and more terrifying. Juan used everything around him as a weapon. A heavy chair flew through the air, not aimed at the Shade, but at his first companion by the door. The assassin's helper dodged easily, but the chair's real purpose became clear a moment later. It had been thrown with perfect timing to knock the man into position directly under a ceiling light fixture. The fixture, loosened by a writing stylus that Juan had thrown with surgical precision moments before, crashed down on the first accomplice. The man collapsed under the weight of metal and broken glass, his weapon skittering across the floor. Lee Sue watched from behind her overturned desk, her eyes wide with amazement. She had seen Juan throw the stylus, but it looked like a random, desperate act. Now she realized it had been calculated with mathematical precision. The second accomplice tried to get a clear shot at the human, but Juan was already in motion again. The professor's heavy desk, somehow turned on its side, came sliding across the floor like a battering ram. The accomplice leaped to avoid it, but landed exactly where Juan had predicted. A modified chair, its legs sharpened to points by being dragged across broken metal, waited for him there. Parkmin, watching with her compound eyes that could track fast movement better than most species, tried to follow Juan's actions. The human seemed to be everywhere at once. He would appear from behind cover, throw or push something, then vanish again before the shade could target him. But the shade was not helpless. He was still faster and stronger than any human. His enhanced reflexes, developed on a world where hesitation meant death, kept him alive as debris and improvised weapons flew around the classroom. "You fight like prey." The shade roared, smashing through another desk as he pursued the human. "You run and hide instead of facing me directly." "No!" Juan's voice came from somewhere in the shadows created by the destroyed lighting. "I fight like a human. There's a difference." A fire extinguisher, somehow modified with components from broken computer terminals, rolled across the floor toward the shade. The assassin kicked it aside contemptuously, then realized his mistake as thick chemical foam began filling the air. But this was not ordinary fire-suppressant foam. Juan had mixed it with cleaning chemicals from the maintenance closet, creating a choking cloud that burned the eyes and throat. Cho Yuki, her crystal body dim with shock, watched the shade stumble through the chemical fog. His enhanced senses, designed to track prey through the toxic atmosphere of Keth Prime, had become a liability. The improvised chemical mixture overloaded his ability to smell and taste, leaving him effectively blind. The shade fired wildly into the fog, energy blasts lighting up the artificial mist like lightning in a storm cloud. But Juan was no longer where the assassin expected him to be. The human had used the confusion to position himself above his enemy, balanced somehow on the remains of the ceiling fixtures. Songray gasped as Juan dropped from above, but not to attack directly. Instead, he landed behind the shade and immediately rolled away again. The assassin spun to follow, but his feet became tangled in networking cables that had been stretched across the floor at ankle height. The shade was incredibly strong and recovered quickly, but the brief stumble was enough. More cables, taken from the destroyed computer systems, whipped through the air like snakes. Juan moved with practiced efficiency, using the shade's own momentum and strength against him. Young-ho, despite his fear, found himself studying Juan's technique with professional interest. The human was not stronger than the shade, but he understood leverage physics and timing in ways that turned the assassin's advantages into weaknesses. The chemical fog began to clear, revealing the aftermath of the brief but intense struggle. The shade sat bound to a chair with networking cables, computer cords, and strips of fabric torn from window blinds. The bindings were not random, but formed a complex pattern that distributed force and made escape nearly impossible. Juan sat calmly on a desk nearby, not even breathing heavily. A small cut on his forehead was the only sign that he had been in a fight. He was once again holding his writing stylus, rolling it between his fingers with the same casual motion he had used during lectures. Around the room, his alien classmates stared at it with expressions of shock, awe, and something approaching fear. The quiet, helpful student who had shared his lunch and explained homework problems had just systematically dismantled the most feared assassin in the galaxy, using nothing but classroom supplies and an understanding of physics. The shade struggled against his bindings, but the cables only tightened with each movement. For the first time in his career, he had been completely outmatched. "The thing about persistence hunters," Juan explained to his amazed audience, "is that we don't need to be stronger or faster than our prey. We just need to be smarter and more patient." Outside, security alarms continued to blare as help finally approached the classroom. Security forces burst through the destroyed classroom door, with weapons drawn and energy shields activated. They expected to find a massacre, hostages, and the most dangerous assassin in the galaxy holding students at gunpoint. Instead, they found the shade and his two accomplices neatly bound with what appeared to be a combination of computer cables, chair legs, and an impossibly complex pulley system made from window blinds. The legendary assassin sat in stunned silence, his reputation as thoroughly destroyed as the classroom furniture around him. Kim Hwan had returned to his original seat in the third row. His notebook was open to a fresh page, his stylus ready to take notes. The only evidence that he had been involved in any kind of struggle was a small bandage someone had given him for the cut on his forehead. "Professor Veltar," Juan called to the still-shaken instructor, raising his hand politely like any other student. "I'm sorry about the interruption, but could we continue the lecture? I think we just had an excellent practical demonstration of predator and prey relationships." The massive Corvani professor stared at his human student with an expression of complete bewilderment. His bark-like skin had shifted through several different colors during the past few minutes, indicating emotional states that most species had never seen a Corvani experience. Around the room, medical teams attended to the injured students while security officers tried to understand what had happened. The Shade's bindings were so complex that it took 3 engineers and a computer specialist to figure out how to safely remove them. Song Ray, an Etherian whose crystalline arm bore spider web cracks from the Shade's earlier violence, chimed softly to get Juan's attention. Her light was still dim from shock, but curiosity was beginning to overcome her fear. "Juan," she asked, her voice like distant wind chimes, "were you ever going to mention that you were military?" Juan looked up from his notebook, where he had been sketching diagrams of the classroom's destroyed furniture. "Former Special Forces, actually," he said with a casual shrug. "But I'm studying xenobiology now. Much more peaceful career path." He gestured to his neat notes, which somehow included detailed observations about the different species' fear responses during the crisis. "Besides, I really am interested in learning about Deathworld adaptations. It's fascinating how different evolutionary pressures create such diverse survival strategies." Lee Sue, who had watched the entire confrontation from behind her overturned desk, slowly stood up and brushed dust from her uniform. "You helped me with my homework last week," she said in a confused voice. "You shared your lunch with me when I forgot mine." "I still will," Juan replied with the same gentle smile she remembered from their study sessions. "Math is math, whether you're calculating orbital mechanics or the trajectory needed to bring down a ceiling fixture at exactly the right moment." Park Min, the Zephyrite student whose compound eyes had tracked Juan's movements better than anyone else, buzzed her wings nervously. "How long were you planning that fight?" Juan tilted his head, considering the question seriously. "I wasn't planning a fight at all. I was just paying attention to my environment, the same way you would on any dangerous world. When you grow up on a class, 12 Deathworld, situational awareness becomes automatic. As security teams dragged away the captured assassins and maintenance crews began assessing the damage, Professor Veltar hesitantly moved toward his lectern. The holographic display was somehow still functioning, showing the cellular structures they had been studying before the interruption. "Perhaps," the professor said uncertainly, "we should postpone the rest of today's lesson?" "Actually," Juan said, raising his hand again, "I'd really like to hear more about convergent evolution in hostile environments." Today's events were a perfect example of how different evolutionary paths can lead to similar survival strategies. Cho Yuki, still nursing her cracked crystal arm, made a sound like breaking glass that passed for laughter among her species. Similar strategies? You just defeated the most feared killer in the galaxy using a fire extinguisher and some computer cables. "Exactly," Juan replied enthusiastically. "The Shade evolved on Keth Prime to become a perfect predator for that specific environment. But when you transplant any species to an unfamiliar setting, their specialized adaptations can become disadvantages." Young Ho, the massive Corvani student, rumbled thoughtfully. "So you used his expectations against him?" "Among other things," Juan nodded. "Humans are generalists. We're not the best at any one thing, but we're pretty good at adapting to new situations quickly." As the classroom slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, the other students began to understand something fundamental about their human classmate. He was not just a quiet, helpful study partner. He represented something that made even experienced spacefaring species uncomfortable when they thought about it too deeply. Professor Veltar cleared his throat and pointed to the holographic display. "Well, if we're going to continue, let's discuss how environmental pressures shape behavioral adaptations." The students settled back into their seats, but everything had changed. They now looked at Juan with a mixture of respect, fascination, and healthy caution. Here was a being from the most dangerous classification of world in the galaxy, sitting calmly among them and taking notes about xenobiology. "Oh," Juan said, looking up from his notebook with an innocent expression, "I should probably mention that I'm much more competitive about grades than I am about fighting." He paused, then added with characteristic human humor, "Though I suppose that should worry you more, not less." As the lecture resumed, focusing on cooperation versus competition in evolutionary development. His alien classmates began to truly understand why humans had such an unusual reputation in galactic society. They were not conquerors or warriors, but something potentially more concerning. Survivors who had turned adaptation itself into an art form. The galaxy was vast and filled with wonders, but perhaps none more intriguing than the Deathworlders who smiled politely and asked to get back to studying.